those of you that are live, thank you for joining us. This is Jennifer Cabista. I'm the superintendent. We are about to start our budget meeting in our new platform here in our own district office. So please bear with us as we work through some technical difficulties in getting everybody on board in this new process. I want to first say we thank Western Oregon for allowing us to be in their venue, but really have moved back and are building our own platform so we can have a little bit more conversations in our meetings. So just bear with us. This is what I call Central School District Virtual 1.0. There are some other things that we're working through as we continue to get better at this. So just, this is our first one together. So bear with us, but we believe this will allow for a little bit more robust conversation amongst us, both for the budget committee meeting as well as the board meeting. So thanks all for being here this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer. So with that virtual gavel, we will reconvene the meeting that we opened on May 18th of 2020 for the Central School District Budget Committee. Let's start with the flag salute. So I don't know if I don't see a flag there. I don't have one, but if there's one in the room there, that would be fine. So okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, everybody. And then I'll turn that, I guess we need to have roll call here. Cease, can I delegate that to you or Jennifer? I don't have a list of all the members. So
yes, I'll be glad to. Aurelia doesn't have microphones, so good. I will do that. And the board members, Steve Love.
Here.
And Peggy Klein.
Here.
Don Wall.
Here.
Darcy Kirk.
Here.
Jan Job. Vidal Pena.
Here.
And Jerry Schinkel. And if you all couldn't hear Jerry through the microphone, he is here, so I will let you know that. You can do that. Nope, that didn't work, Chair. So our budget chair, Representative Mike Neerman.
Here.
And let's see, who else do we have? Tom Perry. And Richard is with us. Rachel Dabercow. And Mary Schellenbarger is excused. All right. So that is all we have for roll call, Chairman.
Thanks. I'll turn it back over to you for you and to Jennifer for the update.
So as we convened our meeting the last time, we were a couple of days ahead of a release of the economic forecast by the state Oregon Office of Economic Advisors. That was released on Wednesday, May 20th. Right after that, the Oregon Department of Education and all of our professional associations, including the Superintendent's Association, my Business Officials Association, started working with Oregon Department of Education to try to determine what the economic picture might be for the various funds in that make up school funding. Based on that, we were able to get some guidance about what potential cuts might look like. As a reminder, these cuts, currently the governor has made an across-the-board cut directive to agencies, which includes the Department of Education and includes their oversight over the state school fund. And that's really all we still have to go on at this point. However, we know what another sort of across the board cut might look like based on various sources of funding. And then we don't know still what might happen if the legislature convenes and they have the only ability to rebalance funds to determine, for example, the uses of state reserve funds, of the Education Stabilization Fund. There are a variety of levers that could still be pulled in order to increase funding. So what we wanted to do tonight, just briefly with the Budget Committee, is let you know, again, a reminder of the only budget that's been prepared so far, and the one that we presented on May 18th, is a budget that presumes full funding. It still continues to presume that the original budget that we were working off of in February is there, and we made a few adjustments to expenditures, but basically pretty much rolled things up, that things were fairly flat in those assumptions. What we have for you this evening is what the cuts would look like for us. And you were sent out a document, and hopefully folks got a chance to look at that.
Lisa, I have the ability to share, so I can share that
Could you?
publicly. Absolutely.
That would be great. So Jen will bring that up on the screen, so you'll be able to follow along there as well. And what this document does is offer suggestions of the kinds of cuts that we could make to meet again, what we're currently hearing as potential impacts from the our professional associations working with the Oregon Department of Education. And those, I've divided it out here by sort of basically different funds that we get through state income tax, state lottery tax, or state lottery proceeds, and then again, the corporate activities tax, some of which actually was slated to go into the general fund for the state school fund, and some of which had its own separate account, which was to be sent out to us as the student investment account. So at the top of this document, I listed the general fund, and there are really two line items of revenue in the general fund that come directly from the state, and one of them is the state school fund, but the other is a pass-through through the Willamette ESD. So you see SSF is the first one, and then the second area would be our line item, which is the Willamette ESD. They get a portion of the state school fund that they then pass through to us. Part of it we buy services with, and then part of it we just pass through to be able to cover costs in our general fund. That would also take a bit of an impact, so I've listed that separately. What the appropriation amount we were allocated on February 25th is $28,080,000, $80,331. So on the far right, some of you might have to sort of reduce your little pictures if you have pictures of all of us over there. What we were given as a target reduction to that would actually amount to reduction in our state school fund of $1,324,600 or so. So we took that $1.3 million deduction if that were to come through. And I think we've talked about the values and priorities that we would like to maintain. We are working to keep our workforce whole, hoping to keep our employees in their jobs. So our goal is to not cut staff. Our second priority is to keep students whole. And by that, we mean to not impact their instructional days, particularly after the spring term that we've been through, knowing that students need every bit of instruction they can get. We have hoped to find savings elsewhere. And we've been pretty fortunate in that over the last few years, not only have we had some contingencies and reserves built up, but we've also been able to set aside quite a bit of money to make other kinds of investments of time. And those are extra hours potentially or extra days that our staff might get, but they are not part of their regularly scheduled pay. So we looked at those kinds of things first, along with vacancy savings, the kinds of openings that we've had that we have not yet filled, where we've put a freeze on hiring. And so some of those are listed here. So for those of you, some of this is a little jargony, so I'll go through that. For example, the first thing that's listed is team engagement. And what that is some money that we have set aside to be able to pay extra to our faculty and staff to be able to assist with coordinating district-wide activities, building teams, for example, getting folks together to support students in the positive behavior intervention supports, to be able to manage initiatives that come up and things like that.
Cease, let me add
Yes.
in as well. This is Jennifer. Part of that team engagement gives principals the autonomy to, when they feel it's necessary to pull different teams together, that they have the ability to do that. And so that money is really focused on that work that may not be able to be done during the workday, but could be done, as he says, in extra hours, an hour here after school, or in the morning, or potentially even extra days before school starts or as school ends. So really focusing on both that, as we talk about the development of the whole child academically, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. And so principals having the autonomy, because you want your leadership. And as we continue to talk about, voice as we develop good teaching and learning and our programming, that's really what that money is specifically targeted for.
Yes, thank you. That's a better explanation. So there is some money set aside in that. And basically what I've done here is sort of use that as a way to reduce our budget in an impact that would definitely impact us, but potentially available to reduce that. And the odd dollars are because I'm trying to balance the $615 I have to budget. So enrichment, this was designed as a way for us to supplement learning, particularly in connection with a grant we have. It's called the 21st Century Grant. It is federal money for after-school programming, and so after and before school programming. So the 21st Century Grant covers much of our needs, but we had actually budgeted money in the general fund to be able to give additional supports there, because perhaps the uncertainty of our delivery of after-school programming in the future, depending on whether or not we have students back and what kind of groups and things we can gather them in. We looked at that and saw that that additional support would potentially be a place to save money in the general fund. We still have the 21st Century Grant. We may have to monitor that grant money and determine impact on programming. But this was a line item for, again, extra pay for current staff or hiring additional support staff to bring in for those programs. Doesn't get rid of after-school programming, but it could impact it. We have money set aside for PD, professional development. Again, those could be extra days before the school year starts or at the end of the school year. It just could be extra hours here and there after a regularly scheduled workday. And that is also, there are some specific days set aside for professional development that could require extra pay. We did not put that as a line item. We could add that if the budget picture looks worse, but at this point, we were able to balance the budget reduction without that. Again, all of these are speculative numbers, but there is some more money there that we could use towards the savings. Right now, all of that professional development is left intact in what would be our next version of the budget. A lot of things we look at, we often look to travel first as a way to cut, and in order to address the current budget iteration, the only one that we've presented to you, we have already reduced travel. So that line item had already been affected. We left some travel in there, and again, that's pretty important to our professional development efforts. There could be further reductions, but it had already taken a hit. And the same thing with contingencies. The budget that you saw actually did away with a curriculum contingency, and in fact had lowered capital repairs contingency to a smaller percentage. So those have already both been reduced, but more work could be done there if we need to. This next section is called Moved to Student Investment Account. And again, the student investment account, which is the significant investment that was made from money generated by the corporate activities tax. We went through a big strategic planning process, a community engagement process, got lots of input about the kinds of services and supports for students that money could be used for. We have been told, and that actual fund is on the next page, but we have been told that there could be some money in there next year. So we are looking at how to best use that money, but there are 3 line items that were pretty important to us because they were funded in the general fund in 2019-20, the current budget year. They were intended to be one-time expenses. The intent was to add capacity in these areas and move those positions or services to the student investment account. We want to honor that to try and keep continuity there. So these 3 line items include 2 TOSAs, which stands for Teacher on Special Assignment. Those were hired specifically to help 2 of our elementary schools deal with behavior issues with students, freeing up classroom teachers and our mental health counselors and our principals to focus on other issues. So those two positions currently are on staff. We want to preserve those, but in order to make the $1.3 million cut, we are moving those to the student investment account. And same thing with a teacher on special assignment in English as a second language. So a specialist that was hired by one of our elementary schools to work with classroom teachers and with students. We've seen some great results there. We want to make sure and fund that position, continue current services, but that had always been intended to move to the student investment account. And the last move we would propose there, we have always had Polk County mental health associates in our schools. And last year, knowing we had some one-time money that we would be able to move to the student investment account, we actually hired additional, or contracted for, these are not our employees, we contracted for additional mental health counselors from Polk County Mental Health at the secondary level. So we went from a one half-time person to cover both the middle school and high school to 2 full-time mental health counselors. Again, that's been critical in the past, but we see there will be greater need for that. We want to preserve those positions and have removed those from the general fund. And the next few things are vacant positions. These are positions that are not currently filled. They are things we would have to figure out how to do without. For example, the after-school coordinators, we had one in each elementary school. We would retain one. The class size reduction instructional assistants, those are positions that we have funded for the last few years, but we don't always fill. They are a way to help increase the adult ratio in classrooms if we have particularly large enrollment at certain levels. And our board secretary left us during this year, and that also serves as the assistant to the superintendent. We're not sure how we're going to do without that position, but that's one that the superintendent has asked us to consider defunding in order to meet our savings goal. And we had a cabinet level director, our director of teaching and learning. That is another position we would propose not to fill if we have to make these funding cuts. Again, that leaves 2 licensed administrators at the district office level to handle all of the student support and teaching and learning. And one of them is your superintendent, who's also supposed to be doing other things. But that position does obviously yield savings that we can put towards maintaining student instructional days and jobs. We had one more position and we've frozen it, but I'm not putting any savings from that position because we may have to fill that job as we move on depending on student need. Those cuts and those dollars include salary plus APR, which is associated payroll costs, so that includes taxes and benefits. Those savings listed there could save us the $1.324 million that we potentially will need based on how the budget process moves forward at the state level. So are there questions about those positions?
And again, I would ask for those that may not have used Zoom before, you have a panel at the bottom. If you click on the participants, you can see a hand raised, and then we will take those from that list.
Presenting, I can't use know why, but I can't use my cursor to mute myself, Jen. I don't know if that's your whole screen is covering up my ability
So
to.
I don't know that I'm following the rules, but I have a question.
Go ahead, Don.
So just clarification, I didn't see any percentages on here. What the amount that you're taking out is based on what level of guidance?
That's a great question, and I was trying to get that, but I can't get back to my screen to pull up that for you for some reason.
So
4.47.
I'm going to stop sharing for a second to see if that helps cease here. So just give us a second and then I'll pull it back up.
I guess last time we talked about an 8.5% cut and the fact that that was equivalent to a 17% cut for the second half of the biennium. I'm just trying to get a sense of what we're aiming at here.
Yeah, that is 4.7% cut, and that is all of the cuts that would be taken in the second year of the biennium.
So where does that come from? I mean, where's that 4.7% come from?
That is the ODE working with our association with COSA and OASBO, and they are actually taking the numbers that the economists predicted for revenue from the income tax as well as lottery and the corporate investment tax, corporate activities tax, and they determined what percentages could apply to each of those funding streams. And they came up with a $490 million cut to the state school fund. So we took that $490 million and determined what our percentage of that would be to get to the 1.324.
Okay, so I guess, so I'm just trying to get a sense of how realistic that guidance is, because it seems like I read something through OSBA or somewhere where it said, well, for right now, we were just going to pretend nothing had happened, which seemed kind of short-sighted. But I guess I'm just trying to get a sense for where ODE and our other organizations are pointing us right now. Is the 4.7% cut their best knowledge right now, or is that just another exercise?
No, I think this is Jen. I think that is their best knowledge. I think the other piece of this is also, again, we are, still having those conversations of if it's going to be fully funded to the $9 billion, which again, that's part of that continued conversation, I think, in a larger picture. But this has been in at least the meeting since the last time we met, really based off the 20th of the guidance that, has been shared with both myself and CEAS. Again, they still want us funding at the $9 billion. I think we're doing both. I think right now, because of the situations that we're in and still trying to work through some of these pieces, we have budgeted to the $9 billion, but we also, this cut sheet is realistic to potentially what we are hearing at this moment in time of potential cuts that could come based off of the economic forecast that was presented on the 20th. So I think, Don, these are realistic of what we know right now. But again, I still think there's a lot of things ahead of us as we continue through these conversations and what will potentially move forward as those decisions are made and as we get more guidance, both from the Oregon Department of Education as from CEAS's lens with the business managers and obviously with our lenses with the superintendents. But this is, like I said, we wanted to start the conversation about what those cuts might actually look like if this were to truly come to fruition of what at least we know from the economic forecast on the 20th.
So one last question along those lines, then I'll shut up. What is the process to get to that point? I mean, right now our guidance is to budget at the $9 billion, but we know that that's not likely to happen. do we just wait? I mean, will they give us guidance before the 20, whatever it is, 9th or whatever, where we have to turn it in?
Well,
Or,
worse than that, we're going to ask you on the 8th, we're going to ask the budget committee to adopt a budget. And that's kind of what we need to talk about tonight quickly, since we're already kind of over time here. I talked too much. Hoping to get guidance about which budget items we want to prepare, because in order to approve something to forward to the board for the 22nd, we need to take a stab at what numbers we want to use.
okay.
So that's the general fund. Again, there's a little bit there I show from the Willamette ESD. That little bit currently is used to create a contingency line for a special ed IA. We get a lot of move-ins during the year of students who need one-on-one support. We don't staff up just in case. So we've put that money into a contingency and a reduction to the overall state school fund, reducing the amount we get from the ESD reduces the funding for that contingency. And then we just have to reprioritize everything if one of those students comes in that needs that support. So that's the general fund. The second page, I will not go into as much detail, but well, I've just frozen, I guess. If you move to the second page, that's why.
Yep, I have moved to the second page.
My screen just froze. Okay. The High School Success Act, we were, it was suggested there that we had about a 35% cut to that. And that would reduce that fund by $295,000. Well, because a lot of the activities and professional development and things that we had planned for in this current year, the first year of the biennium, were not done, we anticipate having around $225,000 of carryover, and therefore we will probably be able to carry on our high school success programming with a reduction in purchased services. That we had budgeted that and not spent it, so a slight reduction in those purchased services, and that was for if we needed professional development, speakers, things like that. So we think the high school success budget will be able to carry out most of our programming without impact.
And I just want to be clear on this point. You know, again, part of this carryover is because of what we have been working through this spring and, you know, students not being in the high school. And so that savings is to some degree because of what has taken place this spring. So again, I want to be clear because normally that cost would not, or that savings would probably not have been there should we have not been in the circumstance that we are this spring. So I want to be clear about that because I know that there could be questions brought forth. Again, we've had these unique situations. So to some degree, for at least another year, we would potentially be close to being whole and continue our work there, which is, we're seeing some great impact with the work that they're doing at the high school.
Yeah, as you can imagine, high school success is mostly about very personal touch support for students regarding career, college readiness, and attendance. And so those high touch supports aren't in play right now. That's kind of specifically what we call out there. So the student investment account, and again, this is new money. We had planned to move some things from the general fund. We actually have a position that has been funded for the last several years from a special grant called our Trauma Informed Grant. We had planned to move that to the student investment account. And we had a lovely list of things that we had hoped to do. and they are telling us to plan for almost a 37% cut in that money. But we are concerned, frankly, that that is a 1 year. We are concerned about the future stability of that fund. Because it's new money, because it is highly dependent on business and corporate activity, our concern about funding new initiatives or even planning to fund new initiatives makes us a little wary of that at this time. So what we would propose budgeting in the student investment account is listed here. Again, that $1.629 million for 1 year is down quite a bit from what we had been allocated in early going. But we would bring over some hired staff, and these are all staff who are currently with us, our whole child coordinator, our elementary behavior specialists, our English language development specialist, and then a communications coordinator. These are all functions we currently have. In addition to that, I mentioned we moved over the contracted mental health counselors from Polk County, but we also had added a lot of programming and professional development in specialty areas, and I'll just let Jen briefly mention the acronyms there.
When we're talking about professional development, really there's key areas that we're looking at. Obviously the first, and we'll continue to have the conversation of equity within the school district, as there is training tied around restorative practices, culturally responsive teaching, all fall into that area of equity. Social emotional learning, that has been a really big focus, especially this spring, and we will continue that moving forward. Multi-tiered systems of support, which is really how do we build good systems, foundational instruction, but at times there is also a need to intervene. And so that's really building a good model and what that looks like. And then universal designed instruction, which is really focused on engagement and how we continue to engage students in learning and pull out the learning from them. Those are very large areas, and some work we have started and will continue to do within the district, and moving, to be able to do part of that with the student investment account moving forward. I think there's also, again, right underneath that, tied into that, is we have been working through and trying to build some academic intervention programming as part of that. And so again, wanting to be able to have those opportunities to purchase contracts or services to really support our staff, which in return is going to support the students within our school district as we move forward. And then and I'm just, from a supply standpoint, I think it's been very different this spring. And the list that's on the supplies and materials is not what we had initially had proposed in our first SIA. So
we did. We just had them lower on the priority list.
Fair.
I don't see toilet paper on there. You mentioned toilet paper.
And we've had a good conversation about this the last few days, because again, I'll be honest, when we look at that list, and as we are concerned about will this continue moving forward, and we hope it will, but we also have to be realistic in our processes and financial stability within the school district. So really have taken that approach of what do we need for the health and safety of students. And so again, you see those listed in the supplies and material. I'm going to let Cease talk. I'm going to hand it back to her now, just a little bit about the Hvac and the antimicrobial lights. Microbial. See, I'm still learning that myself about, again, these are some one-time funding that we are we're lower down on the list, but have raised up since we've had the spring happen.
Yeah, thanks. That's exactly right. These were two items when we thought of all of the things we could do to impact what we called the 4 buckets of the Student Investment Act. The number one bucket is actually in our district, from our community, was the health and safety of students. And two of these items were on there as one-time expenses, and they were pretty low on the priority list. But the currently, particularly at the high school, our ability to control airflow is limited. We have some older systems there, and this particularly was an investment, even though it's an investment in equipment or systems. We put it in the student investment account because it really is about student health. And it so happens that the work that we had talked about doing would actually better support us as we talk about how we put students back into buildings, how we manage cross-contamination, how we manage folks moving from parts of buildings into other parts of buildings. So this is a potential use we would consider bringing back if we were to get the full amount that's showing there, the $1.629 million. Partly, again, it's a one-time expense. Not knowing of the future of the funding for this, hiring folks, and we can certainly hire somebody for $125,000. We just wouldn't feel confident at this point that that position would be funded in the following biennium. Same thing with antimicrobial lights. These were an investment that would actually be put in our kitchen, and we talked about our restrooms. They are typically installed for food safety reasons, and the light that is emitted actually is shown to reduce microbes and bacteria in these high touch settings or in the kitchen where you have food. They are not antiviral. The only light spectrum or something, and Jan Job will have to correct me on this, that could affect viruses is UV lighting. That's not safe for humans, so we are not installing UV lighting systems. The company that makes these antimicrobial lights has been very clear about saying that their product is not proven to have any effect on viruses, although they said some tests are being done in labs on that. But it really will increase overall, as we all know, getting rid of any kind of bacteria or any kind of health risks will improve the rest of us having a chance at dealing with whatever other kind of symptoms or syndromes come our way. So these, again, were one-time things. We had them pretty far down on the priority list, but it's something that could move up because it could improve our health and safety in our new facilities environment. But we have a whole list of other stuff. All of these expenses in the SIA were approved by the Department of Ed, and they knew that districts would need to have flexibility in moving things around. So if these weren't needed, or something else was needed, or we found out this money could be counted on for future biennium, we could always go back and hire some of those extra support folks we need. And the last thing on there, ESSER, is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That is money from the CARES Act, so it is federal money intended to help schools get through the damages or the losses that were incurred in student learning because of the closure of schools. And our possible allocation, this money has not been received by the state of Oregon, therefore not fully allocated yet, is $744,000. The good news about that is we could get some of it as early as the end of this month. We'll be able to access it. They are certain in July. It can actually be used through next summer. So being able to have this money to beef up our summer school programming, our summer bridge activities, which is moving kids from one sort of level to another, is going to really, really help. It can be used for technology. It can be used for programming. So that money is listed there. We are going to budget that without any sort of real sense yet of what that exact dollar amount is, or how we will use it, because we do have other sources of summer school funding. So we would do what's called blending and braiding, figuring out how to use different pots of money in a way that is true to the purpose of that funding. But the good news is this is something we'll get that can last us through 2 summers. So I was trying to get from Aurelia if we had any public comment, and she had not responded to me yet if she had received anything.
Why don't we go to committee questions and then we can come back to public comments.
Great.
Does anybody have any questions or anything to say? I have one, Cease. So I forget the exact number, but the total percentage of the cuts was 4 something percent, and that seems less than the 8% or 17% that I heard coming out of the state. Is that because part of the money that the school district gets is based on property taxes, and that's not expected to change? Is that why it's about half of what I expected to hear?
Well, the cut, this 8% or 17%, would be just to the state school fund portion. And so, I mean, you're right that we do get property taxes, and those are usually pretty, have a lot of equilibrium to them. So we don't see a lot of change there because of the effects of the pandemic. But the actual state school fund portion originally that would have been the 8.5 or 17%. After the economists came out and things look much better, the state hasn't made any changes to its predictions just because right now they're kind of waiting to see. But since the economic picture was actually better than what that 17% was based on, I was surprised it was this much lower too, frankly. That is sort of an enormously different picture, but it's also based on the individual streams of funding for state school fund. So part of that, even in the general fund, is the corporate activities tax, and that did not change as much as, for example, the lottery funding or the income tax funding. So, and I can send you out all we got some slides about that, and I can forward that to everybody to kind of look through and see how that's being calculated by our folks.
Good, thank you. That would be interesting.
I will do that. Tom?
I don't see any hands up.
Tom Perry here in the room has a question, but he's not getting his microphone to work. So he's going to ask his question and we'll repeat it for you.
Good, thanks.
Jared is coming over to bang on it and make it work. But...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you. Thanks, Jared, but you don't look like your picture.
Thank you. This is maybe a redundant question, but in my 40-some year working life.
Just a second, Tom. I don't think anybody can understand you at all because the audio you're putting out, your microphone, it is garbled and slow. So hang on
All right.
just a second. We'll see if we
In
can.
my 50-some year working life,
Go ahead, keep going. We're good now. We got you in good sound.
okay. In my 40 to 50 year working life, more like 55 years, when I talk to a doctor, he'd say, well, you're either sick or you're well. Or if I go to the dentist, he'd say, well, your teeth are fine, you need a filling. But when you talk to an economist, you ask them how the economy is doing, and they say, well, it depends. And that has been consistent for all those years. My concern is that there is a blooper in the system somewhere. I appreciate the fact that the economists gave us the worst possible news first, but I'm surprised that they came back and said, well, it isn't as bad as all that. It's only a quarter as bad as it really was. So I am not going to necessarily place a great deal of faith in the numbers that they gave us for a while. Hopefully we can get a confirmation by next week, but wait for the other shoe to drop. I'm just not confident those are good numbers.
And
Good,
I
thanks.
yeah, and I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we're going to continue to talk through is, you know, it's not only this year, but it's the future. And I think it's a combination of both. And I appreciate that comment, because we are having to work through that of where not only will we be this year, but where might we be in the next 2 years as we move forward with that. So I think there's still a lot of conversations even through the next few months. I think, as C says, you know, we're going to need to adopt a budget, and there may be other follow through that we will have to do as a school board and as a budget committee in the future. But these are based off of what we have in those conversations, the best scenarios at this point that we feel comfortable sharing with you all as we continue forward in this process. So appreciate those, because we have those same feelings as well right now.
Good, thanks. Is there anybody else that has any comments or questions? Do we have anything from the public? Did Aurelia get anything from the public?
There were no comments. She put a text note in our Zoom, so she says at this point there were no comments.
Okay, good. Well, we're a little bit over time, actually quite a bit over time. Thanks everybody for the presentation. I think that sets us up nicely for the June 8th meeting. So we'll reconvene a week from today, unless there's an objection to that. And hearing none, we will be scheduled for Monday, June 8th at 6:00 p.m. And this part of the budget committee meeting is adjourned, and I'll turn it over to whoever's there to start the school board meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. We'll just, school board members, if we'll take a quick 2-minute break here, let the budget committee exit out, and then we will start our meeting. So for those of you out in the community, you may see our screens go out of video for 2 minutes, and then we will come back on. So please hang with us as we, again, allow our budget committee to exit out, and then we will start our June board meeting. So thank you. I'm going to do a quick review of perfect. Looks like I have all of our board members. So again, I just want to welcome everybody. So we're now shifting to our June board meeting, and I'll hand it over to our board chair, Steve Love, to start, and then he and I will go back and forth here a little bit as we go through the board meeting. So
Great, thanks.
Steve.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'd like to go ahead and call the Central School District Board of Directors meeting to order. We'll start with actually the roll call. So this is also a bit of a mic check, just to double check, make sure things are working. Jan Job.
Present.
Jerry Schinkel.
Present.
Don Wall.
Present.
Peggy Klein.
Here.
Darcy Kirk.
Here.
And Vidal Pena. Vidal, there he is. Okay, confirmed here. Okay, let's go ahead then and do the flag salute. It might be best to have someone there in the room at district office to lead the flag salute, since that's where the flag is. Jan, would you mind doing that?
I'm happy to. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation under
one
God.
nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was interesting. It was a little bit delayed, so I was trying to time my pledge to what was coming actually across the computer. So I think I did pretty well. We'll have to listen back to that, see if
I think we shouldn't try to sing though.
so audio quality is not great, but I think we will proceed. So turn it over to the superintendent for some opening comments in light of some of the things that have been going on in our nation over the last week, before we go into the actual agenda for tonight. So Superintendent.
So thank you, Board Chair Love. And I just wanted to take a moment this evening just to share a few thoughts. And obviously a lot has happened over the last few weeks. And so I just want to share a little bit, as I think my role as a superintendent and that's how we continue to move forward. So my job as the superintendent is to build and support highly effective teachers and staff, highly effective principals, have quality family engagement, which we're learning and growing a lot in this distance learning. How do we have quality community involvement and partnerships? Good leadership teams and good and great school district governance that supports lifelong learning and growing for students and their successes, because that's our responsibility. This is an amazing opportunity I have as an educator to serve, and all of this is and will always be grounded in equity. As I've watched the past week and continue to learn as an educator, and this has been really close to my heart, where things are happening in Minnesota. I have a cousin who lives a block away, and I have an aunt that is 6 blocks away. So this hits very close for me personally. So this last week, I continue to learn. As I said, my goal is to continue to learn as an educator. And I pulled up my educational philosophy, a document that I sent to the board as I applied for this position as superintendent. And I want to share a bit of this today. I believe children educated in an equitable and diverse community make significant impacts and differences in communities and the world today. I believe equitable teaching increases student learning, growth, and achievement. I believe equitable leadership increases staff teaching and learning, so students are learning, growing, and achievement is occurring. I believe it is important to elect quality individuals to govern the school district and stay in conversations and advocate for equitable and ethical policy decisions so every child can learn and grow. And do this even when it gets hard, which we are continuing to do here in Central School District. We as a community must continue these conversations, work together, support one another, and stand together when injustice takes place. To all my friends and colleagues of color, I continue to stand with you, learn, and be in conversations as we work to unroot racism within our society. We must continue to care for one another, support from one another, and learn from one another, especially as our students in our community are our future. So again, I just wanted to share that as we started the evening, and I'll give it back to you, Chair Love, to start our proceedings. So thank you.
Superintendent. And I actually remember reading your philosophy of education before we ever met you, and it stood out to me then, and it stands out to me now. So I really appreciate you reminding us of your beliefs and the leadership that you're giving our district and community right now. So for the agenda, we will start tonight with the communication from the floor. We have a relatively short agenda. We'll go from there into our standing reports, and that'll be the superintendent, finance, and board report. Then we'll do consent agenda, and we don't have any specific business agenda topics. We then will close with comments from board members, and then we will be adjourning into executive session. So that is the agenda for tonight's meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the superintendent for our communication from the floor. And
Yes.
Take it away.
Yep, we have just a few questions that came from the community this past weekend as we, again, wanted to share out, make sure we're answering all questions. So the first question, I was hoping to do a district transfer for my son who is about to enroll in kindergarten based on his childcare location. Is there any extra, or is there anything extra I should do, or do I need to reach out to fill out any additional paperwork? So we are asking families if they would like to do an intra-district, so moving from one of our schools to another, to please go to our website at central.k12.or.us. And if you click on the parent link at the top, right there, you're going to see another link that says enrollment and transfer. And then once you're on that page if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you're going to see a link to the intra-district form. And that's the form that we are asking families to complete. We want to be clear that decisions about intra-district transfers will not take place until August. There is a lot of moving parts still within the school district and what next year is going to look like. We need to see how summer goes as it relates to the COVID-19 virus, as well as guidance from the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon Health Authority about opening for the 2021 school year. And I'm going to share a little bit more in my report today about that, but there are still a lot of moving parts. We are asking families that if you do have an interest in doing an intra-district, please do that, but please know that there are still moving parts that we are having to work through as a school district. So that's the first question. With the school year coming to a close, what is the process for returning Chromebooks? So the positive news is if you are going to be returning to our school district next year as a student in any of our grade levels, really first grade through 12th grade, we are allowing families to keep those Chromebooks over the summer. You're going to see our staff share some packets this next week and as we end school with different activities for families to allow their students to do over the summer. We're going to continue with some summer learning opportunities, and we'll continue to update our distance learning page with different activities that students can do to continue their learning over the summer if they would like. If you are a family that may be transferring out of the Central School District, we will continue to post times at the district office over the summer for you to be able to return those Chromebooks. So if you are a returning student, you get to keep those Chromebooks over the summer. We feel that's important to allow some of that learning to continue at your own pace with your family or in the activities that we are beginning to plan moving forward. Third question, what about high school registration for incoming freshmen? What I found out today, especially specific to looking at freshman orientation, there will be postcards coming out to all 8th grade students really in the next couple of weeks from the high school to welcome all of you to 9th grade. So please look out for those in your mail. There will also be additional communications to begin to talk about the first week of August, which really is that invitation to 9th grade orientation. So please know the high school is in full force talking about the ceremonies that are happening this Friday. That's their focus, but please know that they're already turning their attention to the incoming 9th graders and the returning students to Central High School this next year. So just be on the watch out for that. I want to note that some of this orientation and connection could be virtually. Again, there's still some of those pieces that we're having to work through. But again, we look forward to welcoming our incoming 9th graders transferring into our high school. So we're excited about that. And then last question, anything for our 5th grade students? Will they still be getting, their awards and different things as they transition? And contacting with the elementary schools are working on their end of the year festivities. There's one activity I'm just going to keep quiet about because I want everyone to enjoy it. So more to come. I don't normally do that, but this is a unique year, and so there's some cool things that are being planned right now. So I just want to share that, and more of that will come out to the community here in the next several days. Several schools are also doing some 5th grade videos to close out the year, and that will be shared with students, as well as several schools will be mailing those certificates home to students to honor them. So those are the questions from the community as we received this weekend, and wanted to make sure that those were answered as we move forward. And then we'll continue to put those in our FAQs that are on the website moving forward. So thank you, community, for getting those questions to us. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I should have mentioned this before we jumped into that the process that we're using, again, is because we're doing meetings virtually, is we post the agenda on Fridays, if not sooner, before the board meeting. And if any community members have comments, you can share those at our email, info@central.k12.or.us, or you can drop them off at the district office, and we'll make sure that those are addressed in our board meeting. So with that, we are now moving on to the standing reports. We'll begin with the superintendent's report, which, as we've been the last couple of months, we'll go into quite a bit of an update on how we're responding to the COVID-19 situation.
Yes,
and
so
it's learning.
perfect, thank you. So I'm going to look at my lovely technical assistants here to be able to get our PowerPoint going. I just want to share a few areas that we're continuing to build upon, and give us a second here. I'm going to start with, there's a lot of moving parts still, and I think one of the things that I want to make clear is that we have staff working extremely hard based off information that we have, and are continuing to build really good programs. I cannot say enough about our licensed staff and our classified staff and our staff in general of what they have built, implemented, and are really getting students to learn and grow. I saw an amazing Facebook post today from an MES parent talking about Mrs. Kittleson's class and how much her daughter, is now outside looking at different insects and bugs, and how we've tried to continue to engage students in learning through this new process. So again, that's just one example of the different things that we're seeing our staff be able to do to embrace learning and allow students to continue learning in this different environment. So I'm going to give a couple of updates, maybe. Let's see, my battery may have just died. Oh, there we go. So this first slide I previously shared about how we were going to account for participation, or that contact and connection with students. One of the things that I want to say is this is looking at 3 weeks of how we really try to capture when staff contacted students or had that ability. And when I mean contact, we had different avenues to be able to do that, whether a student participated in a Zoom meeting, or whether they were in the Google Classroom doing work, whether there was an email communication back and forth with a teacher, or whether they're just the old school, talk to them on the phone, or had a conversation versus a Remind app that we use within the school district. So again, these are just our first look at those numbers. One of the things I'm going to note is that this has been very much a trial. And so I can tell you right away that this was not as consistent of an implementation across the buildings as we will continue to talk through that if this is our environment next year. I think this was a beta test for us on how this might look as we move forward. And we're, again, I think want to be very clear about this since the beginning. We are trying to make and meet families where they are. And that's not always it's not always an easy thing, because we are trying to support families and the learning at the same time. But again, if we are still in distance learning in the fall, we're going to need to find a consistent way to identify participation and learning in a digital platform. There are some successes here, and I think that's important. Again, first 3 weeks of our distance learning, I want to point out Central High School. It is slightly skewed because the senior class is still in there. And with this data, we know that the engagement did drop off because as of March, many of them were and had met their criteria for graduation requirements. So again, we know that that's a little skewed. I did a little bit of analyzing, and again, this is a starting point, and I want to be clear, this is just us trying to begin to say, how are we going to do this if this could be our environment in the future? So in analyzing this data, overall, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were our highest participation days, and Thursdays being our lowest participation days. So again, I just use this as a starting point. I think it's something that we'll build on. We learned a lot from our staff. We continue to learn a lot from our staff of how we capture this data in that contact and connection. So the second one, I'm going to take a minute to focus on our class of 2020 and what a year they've had. I think this Friday is going to be some amazing times for them, although very different than what we are used to here in Central High School. So Friday we are doing the awarding of the diplomas for seniors. This will be an all-day event honoring cohort of 7 students every 20 minutes. That schedule is, the ceremony is scheduled alphabetically to begin at 8:20 a.m. and proceed with those 7 groups of students and their 2 guests, and we end around 9 p.m. And then there will be a virtual turning of the tassel for the class of 2020. We are encouraging all the guests who are chosen to attend with their senior for awarding of the diploma to live stream. And I want to be clear because we want to be able to live stream to social media, allow them to do FaceTime with other family members and friends, or Skype with other family members, because this is going to be an opportune time to be able to do that, because we don't have the ability to have more than 24 people at a site within the school. We'll be filming this entire day. And there are different stages because we do have different sites within the school. So I'm not going to share very much because we're trying to build a really special moment for our senior class. And so I don't want to give too much away. I can tell you the staff, especially the graduation committee, has been working extremely hard to make it both safe and a moment for them as they really take this end of this journey in their K-12 education. So we're looking forward to it again. And then I will tell you that more information will follow about the June 26th release of that virtual ceremony. So Board members, I know that I've asked you for a few things, and I will be getting you the final information to you on Wednesday of when I will need you and what your slot will be, because again, your participation in this is also very important in this process. So the next slide I'm going to share is about the calendar. So I just want to walk, and I want to be clear that we do not at this time have there's no decision that has been made for a calendar within the Central School District for the 2021 school year. So let me start by that. However, we're starting to get information of what potentially school may look like. There's also been some concern of not having a start date. And so we want to make it clear that we have made a decision that school will resume for the 2021 school year to ease some of the anxieties within our community, that we will begin school on September 2nd. What that looks like could be very different. So you're starting to see, and again, these are just examples. No decisions have been made about a calendar. There is work to still be done, not only with our community, but with our both associations that are part of that process. What I can tell you is we're sort of starting to look at it being built in phases, again, similar to what has been shared in our different counties as we've gone through this process. We have built phase 1, which is the distance learning. So if this is a situation that we need to be in the fall, we know that we have that up and built. So that could be potentially a phase 1 approach should we have another hotspot of the virus, or that potentially could allow us or cause us to stay in this phase 1 still. The other pieces that we're building are potentially what I'm calling phase 2. And we're looking at what would be a hybrid calendar. So it could be a combination of both distance learning as well as in-person learning. And so we've talked about what's called a low ratio. We know that the ratio of students to staff will be low. When we look at that in person, that will look very different. And so we're in the midst of working on some of those protocols. It may also look as an A and B schedule. So A students may come on Mondays, then B students may come on Tuesdays. We've also talked about doing a type of hybrid that every few weeks we stop and do a deep clean. Both of them throughout the day involve making sure the health and safety of our students and the buildings is a priority, but that hybrid calendar could be potentially a second phase. And then what I'm calling the third phase approach would really be sort of back to that regular calendar, similar to what we've done in previous years, and potentially being full-time back into the building. So again, I just want to show this. I want to be clear with the community. We have not made a decision about the calendar. However, we have made some decisions about at least when the start date will be, because we felt that that was important to share with the community at this point. The next slide, 2 slides are specifically focused on the work we are doing for our summer learning program. So we are in the midst of building this program and want to just share some general guidance from the Oregon Department of Education and where we are in our implementation process. So we're looking at running a summer learning program that will either be 5 or 6 weeks in length, going 4 days a week. You will see here on this slide that the overall health and safety guidelines are directly from the Oregon Department of Education. So these are the criteria to potentially do both distance learning and in-person learning. So I want to be clear, this may be our beta test to safely allow kids to be both from a distance learning and in-person learning through our summer school process. And we are being very diligent with this as we build this, because the overall health and safety guidelines are what drive this plan specifically. So we currently right now are in the midst of building all of these procedures that you see listed here. And this process involves our Director of Safety and Security. It involves our nurses. It involves our teaching and learning. It involves our transportation, and it involves our maintenance. So those departments are heavily involved in the development of our implementation amongst these different areas so we can make sure that we're meeting the overall health and safety guidelines. So again, we want to be very transparent about what the criteria is that we will have to do to bring students back in. So we are going to continue to, like I said, we are in the midst of building these procedures, and those will be shared with the community for students that are part of our summer learning program. You're seeing, again, some repetitive things that we've done, obviously with our distance learning and addressing the mental health, and how do we continue to support students through both transportation and nutrition, which is our feeding program that we have been doing for multiple weeks. The next slide really focuses on the who. And so the slides show who in the schools and the district will be prioritized for accessing summer learning. Again, I want to be clear that our focus for summer learning, and it really is, there's really two focuses when you talk about access. One is for students, for example, a graduating senior that may be credit short, to be able to gain those credits, as well as students that may be behind in grades 9 through 11. So again, that credit retrieval process. And then programming for our K through 12 students, really focused on migrant or students without having access because of internet, potentially students with disabilities, are emerging bilinguals as well. So that's going to be our focus of the access to summer school for who that will be. Our focus of what the content will be, again, really 3 solid areas. We're going to continue to focus on the social emotional learning, and then foundational academic skills, specifically both in literacy and math. And so again, we're building that. And then as you look at the classroom instruction, we are looking at building in person, and again, following those guidelines that I showed on the previous slide. And we're looking at potentially building that in-person learning either 1 or 2 days a week for students. But again, these are some of the items we're still working through as we build our protocols for the process to enhance learning in this new environment. But I want to be clear, this could be a really good opportunity for us to build some really good protocols and be able to bring students back into school safely, so families feel that they can do that. So please know that we'll be reaching out to families and sharing information should your student potentially be one of those that we would like to have into our summer school programming, summer learning programming. Oops, let me go back. So the next slide is what I'm going to say the beginning framework from the Oregon Department of Education as we look at how we might open up for the 2021 school year. And again, I think one of the things that I want to just show on the left side, I think that quote is really important right now. I think we're moving in a positive direction in our community, but again, I think we're still in this learning phase. So again, we really aren't making the timeline, the virus is making the timeline, but we're going to plan and build as best we can in accordance with that. So you can see in the framework there, like I said, it's the beginning pieces of that we will be, again, first and foremost focused on public health and safety and what that looks like. Obviously, we're already in those midst of leadership planning and what the operations of school will look like. Again, that care and connection, so the social, emotional, and mental health supports, which as much as we talk about budget cuts, I think it's important that I am so glad that we put the mental health associates and that focus into our schools this year, and moved money to be able to do that, because that's going to be a big part of that. And then finally, fourth, the continuity of the learning, because that's really what our focus is. But this is going to change. And so I share this with you because these are the starting points. We believe we will have guidance here, hopefully in the next week, from the Oregon Department of Education on what this looks like. But this is some of the information that they have shared with us to begin these processes. And again, some of what we are seeing in the summer learning protocols and procedures to put in place, we believe that may be an extension of that, of what that might look like for the school year. So again, I'm just starting to share the frameworks as we get information, and we'll continue to share with the board and the public as we move forward.
And I have a quick question. This is Vidal.
Sure.
So when we're advising the public and parents and students of what phase we're looking at on your slide with the phase 1, 2, and 3, are we gonna kind of meet them at each board meeting and say, hey, we were thinking we're going to be at this phase, but we're still at this phase? Is that going to be like a monthly thing, or is it literally as it comes?
I think it's both. So what I'm happy about is we've built phase 1. What we are building right now is phase 2. I think phase 3 we know how to be in and work in. So again, yeah. So we're in the midst of really building what that phase 2 would look like. Like I said, we think we have some really good people working on protocols to meet the requirements of the Oregon Department of Education. I am blessed to have the staff that I do, and Jason Clark and Brian Weatherly, who is our custodial maintenance manager, and just the work that they're doing. So yeah, Vidal, it will be a month to month, depending on, again, where the governor of the Oregon Health stand, where we're hopefully not seeing any more flare-ups or spots of the virus. That will be part of our continued sharing with the community on where we are. I will do very similarly in July, because if I feel that we know, hey, we believe we're going to be able to start school in phase 2, we will be transparent with that. But that may also not come till August. So I just want to be clear with the community, there is still a lot of moving parts, but we are starting to build all of these, and we'll continue to communicate out as we get those in place. And again, I'm blessed, and we have a lot of really good people working on this in our school district. And then we'll continue to have partners moving forward with that.
All right, thank you.
Yes. So the next piece is really what I'm going to also say is really our first look of how are we doing, or how did families and students see. So the next few slides are just a snapshot of several of the questions we have asked our families for feedback related to the distance learning for all. So I'm going to go through these. This is just a snapshot. This is not all the questions. What we will do in July is go through this data again. Again, you can see from this, we have 150 responses. We know we want more than that. We've been working to share out the survey. I've reached out to a couple community members that have good community connections with different groups within our community, and sharing this as well. So, and I want to be clear, this data was taken as of last Thursday. I know that there have been more people that have completed the survey, but I just want to just give you a quick glimpse of what we're seeing here. So again, the survey's still open, can be found on our website on the front page of the website. You can also find it on our Facebook page, and it's also on the distance learning page on the district website. We're going to keep this open through the end of the school year, because we want as much feedback from families, and as we review our implementation, as we prepare for the 2021 school year, should we be in this environment moving forward. And as I said, this data that I'm about to show is from as of 5/28/20. So this first slide shows just the general feedback by families from grade level. So you can see our largest group that has shared with us so far is our K-3 families. But we know that this data will continue moving forward. This next question is focused on really on our families feeling welcome in this new distance learning environment, because they are really partners with us now. Not that they weren't before, but they are truly working side by side with us. In this survey, the scale in the survey went from a 1, which was a strongly disagree, to a 2, which was a disagree, 3 was a neutral, didn't feel strong either way, to a 4, which is an agree, and a 5 identified you as strongly agreeing with this. So for this question of feeling welcome as partners in this process, we see approximately 60% of our families agree that they felt welcome, really putting question or 4 and 5 together. About 20% answered neutrally that we did okay, or maybe had some struggles with us, and then 17% that they did not feel welcome as partners in this learning environment. So again, just some good data for us to reflect on and what that might look like in the future to improve those pieces. The next one focuses on a question on how families felt their child was adapting to learning in this new environment. 37% agreed their child was adapting fairly well. 27% of them were neutral. And about 36% disagreed their child was adapting and learning in this new environment. And if I've never seen a perfect bell curve, this is pretty close to a perfect bell curve as you look at this. So this doesn't surprise me at all. I think that we have families that really enjoyed this environment. I think that we had families that did not enjoy this environment. So again, this as us trying to reach families as best we can, I think this data is probably about right in how our families are feeling in this new environment and how they adapted to it. So again, just some good starting conversations of how we, if we are in this environment, how we continue to do that moving forward. The next question is focused on families' view of their child adapting to the technology required for distance learning. 63% agree their children were fairly comfortable using the technology, 17% were neutral, and about 19% disagreed that their child wasn't comfortable using the technology. So again, we'll continue to have these conversations, potentially reaching out to families where maybe students jumped into the learning and then maybe jumped out, and how we might help support them to make sure that students are still engaged in the learning. So again, just another view of were students comfortable in the technology. The next one focused on family routines that they built to help accomplish the learning for students. As I shared previously, we were in the earlier materials that we sent out to families, it was really important to us that we help families see that it was important to build the routines with their child as best they could, knowing that these routines may look different between families, but consistency of getting a routine of getting up, having breakfast, getting dressed, and starting the day, doing some learning, going to recess, playing outside, those types of things could help in building some consistency. So you'd see in this slide, 57% of the families responded that said that they had agreed that they had some good routines within their family. 19% were neutral, and then 24% responded that they didn't have good routines at home to accomplish school and personal tasks. So this slide really shows me how it's important of how we reach the families and help them do this. I also know that that's not always easy. And so again, continuing to reach out to them and find ways of what we might be able to do to help in those scenarios. The next slide is focused on really the question, am I sharing, really did kids enjoy do students enjoy the learning environment from your perspective as a parent? So again, you can see that my child enjoys this new environment. Clearly our students do not, or the families of our students do not. 54% of them disagree that their child enjoyed the environment, 22% were neutral, and 24% agreed with that their child enjoyed the new learning environment. So, you know, I take that 24% as there are students that did flourish in this, and so that's an important part for us to make sure that we pay attention to as we move forward. But it's clear that a lot of our families and students do prefer us to have them in our buildings, which we do as well. So the next set of slides is going to focus on actually the student survey that we have going. And our student survey really focused on grade levels 4 through 12 for feedback related to distance learning for all. This was an optional survey for students to complete, but we did encourage many of them to share their feelings and thoughts with us because we felt it was important. We will continue to gather feedback from students until the year closes out next week. And again, this data that I'm about to show you is what I have pulled as of 5/28/20. And then again, this first slide does show the grade level responses so far. And we do have some heavy responses in 4th and 5th grade, as well as 6th through 8th grade. I do think we'll get more 9th through 11th. I know that that information was just shared this past week, so we know that that will continue to get more information within those areas. The next slide focused really on the connections with teachers, that students felt they were connected. And you can see from here on this slide, 52% felt connected to their staff, 35% were neutral, and 13 didn't feel any connection with their teacher. And I want to be clear, this was a different learning environment. So this data of students feeling neutral, that they weren't sure how they felt, that doesn't surprise me at all that our students are saying that. I think this has been learning on how to do that for students as much as our staff. So some of that data is, in my opinion, for what we're having to be in, and which is very different than our normal learning environments. I expected this data to look a little bit this way, because I think kids are learning how to do this in this environment. The next question is really focused on engagement and comfortability in the new learning platforms, such as the Google Meets, the Google Classrooms, and how they correspond with the students, or with how our teachers correspond with students via email, phone, or the app. You could see that 63% of our students felt comfortable in the platform, 24% were neutral, and 13% weren't really comfortable in that learning platform. So good to know that from a technology end, it looked very similar to what the parents also said of that comfortability with technology. The next question, I think this is a really important question. This is focused on what we call in the educational world differentiated instruction, that students felt teachers tried different ways of teaching to help them learn. So again, 60% of the students felt teachers did teach in a different way to pull out their learning. 22 were neutral, so may have had a little bit of that, may not have. And then 11% of the students did not feel that teachers differentiated their instruction. So again, for us, this being our first learning environment in this new platform, I was very pleased with this data. This shows great work by our staff trying to reach out to our students in different ways and meet them where they're at and help them learn. So I really think that's important to point that out. Don't get me wrong, we have growth in that area, but I think it's for this new platform, that's some successes for us as our teaching staff. So kudos to our teaching staff. The next slide focuses on, again, asking the students what the family involvement was to support their learning. 58% felt they had good family support. Within this environment, 19% were neutral, and then 23% of students did not feel their family environment supported their schoolwork and learning. So again, that's one of those areas we'll continue to monitor as we look at this data. And then one of probably the most intriguing and the data that to some degree I have concerns about is the question that we asked if students are able to have strategies really to self-regulate or calm themselves down when they were feeling stressed or upset. And this really ties into our work that we're really focusing on the social emotional learning. One of those key domains is self-regulation, and how can you, do you have strategies to help your self when you are feeling stressed or upset? So 56% of our students that took the survey so far agree that they have a strategy to calm themselves down. 24 were neutral. So they may have a strategy or two, or they may not have a strategy to use. And then 19% stated they did not have a strategy to help support when they're feeling stressed or upset. So that neutral and disagreement to not having the strategy is something that we are paying very close attention to, especially if we are in this environment or as we help kids transition in between both those environments. So again, a little bit more information. We'll continue to monitor these pieces. And then the last two slides really were open-ended questions that we asked the students. And I just wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the impact that this has had with our students. So the first question we asked them was, how has your life changed, or has your family been impacted by this pandemic? And so again, I just give you a minute to look at those. I think it's really important. You all know how important student voice is to me, as well as staff voice and as well as community voice. And you can see some of the feelings of our students up on the screen. I think a couple of them, that's the third bullet down is, yes, things have changed. I feel more alone. And I think that was a statement that was repeated multiple times from different students. I think the bottom one, it makes me mad. I think students are going through a lot of different emotions. So again, just trying to capture what students are feeling so we can help make good decisions moving forward. And then the last second question is really, we try to say what's been positive, or the changes in your life that has helped you and or are allowing you to get through this. And so again, you know, some of these are focused on schoolwork, going at their own pace, and then they can get their stuff done. I love the second one, to be a little bit more responsible, I think, right? That self-reflection as a student, because you probably have a little bit more responsibility depending on your situation and where your family is, as we are trying to meet everybody where they're at. So again, we just wanted to share this with everybody in regards to just some beginning information. The last slide I'm going to share with you is we're continuing to, obviously our student surveys are in progress. Our family surveys are still in progress. We are about to launch here this week our staff survey. So we're just doing our final edits to that. We are going to continue our summer learning program, and more information will come out in the next few weeks, really in the next 2 weeks as we build this. And then we are continuing our conversations and plannings as we prepare for the fall of 2021 school year. So with that, I will open up the floor. If Jared, you want to change us back to just questions from the board and anything that I have shared this evening.
Jen, do you have a target date for when we would have a decision on what the kind of operating mode is going to be come September 2nd?
So we are hearing that, and hopefully this Thursday we'll get a little bit more of a secure date. We are hearing that guidance for the 2021 school year will be out the week of June 8th. Once we have that in our hand, we have already designated several days with our administrative team across the district to begin some of those planning. I think some of the things that we are building right now in the summer school learning environment may continue to shift and be part of that fall 2020. I would like to say by August board meeting, we would have a clear picture of this is what school will look like. That's my goal. But as I say that, being transparent, a lot of this depends on the virus continuing to be in a really good space where the opening up, people are being smart in their choices of as they're out in public, and the continued physical distancing, because that is very clear in the guidance that we're getting that is helping. the cleaning of the schools will be part of that process. So really, that's my goal, is that August board meeting that I will be able to present, maybe sooner than that, but realistically, I think that being transparent with the community and you all, I think that my goal is to, by that August meeting, we have a majority of our pieces in place to be able to share out. Now, I also say that we could get into July, and if things shift, we would then have to pivot back to what I'm going to call is that phase 1 into that distance learning, and then figure out what that might look like. I also want to be clear that, and I hope I'm wrong as I say this, that I think that we may have to be flexible of being able to go in and out of phases, where we may have a month where we may be in distance learning, and then the next month could be a mix of the hybrid. So I think there's a lot of work ahead with my team. And when I say my team, that involves our union leadership. They're very much at the table and will continue to be at the table. We continue to gather feedback from our community, and we will continue to do that. But there are going to have to be some big steps. Again, we feel with what we're building with the summer learning, a smaller group of students that we're wanting to really bring in, because they have had some learning loss more than others. We know all students have had learning losses, but those that have not had internet connection, which is about 10% of our students, we need to do some targeted focus, and a handful of other students in that capacity. We believe that this model could give us some learning, doing it in the safest way. Right now, I know all day today, Jason Clark and Angela Billman, who is one of our nurses, are working side by side, building those protocols to make sure things are safe in the building. So that's my goal, Steve. But as I shared with you guys, I think that we still have a lot of moving things as we move forward.
So, Jen, you kind of just touched on this a little bit. In terms of the health and safety protocols, how can you kind of characterize how much of that we have to do as a district, and how much ODE is just going to hand us and say you need to do this?
I think it's going to be a combination of that. I think that we, so the bonus of having and running emergency childcare in partnership with the YMCA is we actually got to see some really good quality protocols put into place. We are in the midst of looking at those and building upon those and what that will look like. I think there will be some good examples of forms and procedures to use. Like I said, we have one version that we've been able to watch as we've been partnering with the YMCA. I think both Jason Clark and Angela Billman really have been tasked to work with the Oregon Health Authority and what they're sharing with the CDC and trying to build those. So I think it's going to be a combination. Really, we've had conversations even of how kids will wash their hands. And so just some different conversations that I never would expect us to have, but are probably the most crucial conversations that we need to have right now to make sure that we have safe environments as we move into this, what I'm calling phase 2 of a potential hybrid approach to potentially start the fall.
Thanks.
Jen, I was going to ask you about the slides that you were showing. A lot of them had, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. A lot of them had, of course, the questions in English and in Spanish. Do you know or have data as to how many households that answered the survey questions were from our Spanish-speaking families versus how many were from the rest of the community?
So Vidal, we did not on this survey. We had that conversation. I can tell you because I wanted to making sure that all parts of our community are represented. I had the opportunity 2 weeks ago to sit on a community chat with independents And so Ramon, who's their community coordinator, he and I are working in partnership to try and continue to share out with all of our families, specifically our Latin AOX families, to make sure that they're completing the survey, because that's a really important part of that. We will probably, moving forward as we do our surveys, ask more demographic demographic questions, but at this point we wanted families to feel safe and just be able to answer really a handful of questions of how really have things gone. But please know that I'm doing multiple outreaches and with multiple community members to try and reach all of our families moving forward. So know that we talked about that, but we just wanted it to be more of, hey, we just want to get a general feeling of how you felt. Sometimes families feel willing to share more when it is more anonymous, and right now we wanted to just have quality data, but know that that is a topic of our conversation as we think about a larger culture and climate survey that I wanted, that as part of our strategic plan and that we build, that would be part of those questions, so we can be able to decipher that data a little bit more to make sure that we are really reaching all of our families and our students in a most equitable way.
Cool. My next question is, you were talking about the students that didn't have internet capabilities, and it got me thinking about the hot spots that we had, whether it was at the school or other spots. Do we have any data as far as how much we were able to help the community with that? Maybe per day visits from students, or is there from each router or hotspot, is there data that was collected from there that this was accessed by this IP address for this long or anything like that?
Yes, I know they have it. I have not had it. Again, that's been one of those that we'll continue to gather. I don't have that data right now, Vidal, but I will follow up with our tech subcommittee to see if we do have that data. I know one of the things that we're working on right now, the hotspots right now are at the schools. Like I said, I believe we finally have the equipment that we need to do what's called access points. So we will use our internal internet in the schools to attach what's called an access point, and then we will be able to move those buses or those devices that are the Wi-Fi mobile hotspots to other parts of town over the summer. So know that that is one of our next steps. As we continue to do this, I have shared with the board some of and as I say this, I have an amazing tech team who is doing amazing work. Yet it has been very frustrating on the internet side. And as C shared earlier in our budget meeting, some of this is really looking at what do we need to do to continue to build that infrastructure. Because in rural areas, even though we are not that far from Salem, we know that there's a lot of strain on the system, especially the internet system. And so how do we keep bolstering that moving forward? So I will ask that question, Vidal, and get that to the board. I'll put that in the Friday report as I get that information from the tech team.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other
questions? Okay, thank you, Superintendent. Let's go ahead and move on then to the finance update. So I'll turn it over to Cease. You ready?
Hey, yeah, I sure am. Attached or emailed to you today and attached in the link to the agenda were just two financial reports. Again, typically don't get them both at the same time, but I'm just really trying to keep everything up to the minute and will not go over them in detail. Highlighted a couple of spots where you can see that we are making these huge investments in distance learning, one of them being our print shop. Pretty busy folks these days trying to keep up with printing packets and getting materials out to families in a variety of ways so that they can access them, and the others with our hardware and software. The needs are going to continue to increase in that area, so that's another thing we're looking at as we plan to budget for next year. But that was the actual budget to actual. The other thing is the Appropriations Report. And the thing that I noted there is that our food service fund looks like it's overspent. It actually, again, between encumbrances and expenses, it shows as more out than appropriated, but because some of that's encumbrances, we haven't spent that yet. However, that said, food service has had to completely change their model of doing business these last few months of the school year. And in some ways that's more expensive. We've had to switch to more pre-packaged food because a lot of the food that keeps our costs low during the year are actually commodities, are actually from cheese and from a variety of different types of foods that we get, fresh fruits, vegetables, canned frozen foods and vegetables, that those commodities are actually subsidized by the federal government for a lot of them, and we go through a bidding process to get them. But really all we pay is storage and shipping on them. So we are not able to use those in our grab and go meals, and instead creating these grab and go breakfasts, grab and go lunches, we are using a lot more different kinds of foods that aren't available to us at those kinds of subsidies. So we are keeping an eye on that. That could be one that we have to come back to you at the June 22nd budget, our board meeting. After we have our budget hearing, there will be a board meeting, and at that we may have some of these final budget transfers for you, but that may be one where the pandemic has kind of stuck us and we may have to ask to appropriate some more money for the end of the year spending. Other than that, things are looking good.
Okay, thank you, Cease. Any questions for Cease? Okay, we'll move on to the board report. As you see in your agenda, the upcoming meetings that we have, note that our next board meeting, regular board meeting, it's the 6th of July, so it'll be right after the 4th of July weekend. We have our budget and board retreat meeting on the 22nd. We also have a budget meeting next Monday, June 8th. So next Monday, we'll be meeting at 6 o'clock. Is that correct? Okay, and we'll be doing Zoom again. Okay. And then on the 22nd, remind me of the time frame that we're thinking of on the 22nd.
So we have had because of the opening up a little bit with the phase 1, and obviously we are able to have a space here in Hvac Hall. I think one of the questions we can have is normally in June we do a retreat, obviously myself with the board of directors, and I may have some more guidance and may have some questions. So that was looking at really an afternoon meeting of a couple hours heading into the board hearing for, if we needed it then, which we believe we will, that we would do a few hours before that. It may potentially be having conversation with the principals and some of the things that we're building, potentially even bringing in union leadership as we have these conversations on what the school year might look like, to give you guys a little bit more information, but then move into that. So that's really what that is. I think we can continue to talk through that. I think we can do it safely. I did it safely with 17 of my administrators this past week as we started to talk about what next year and how the end of the school year would happen. We did it in a very safe way. Again, tonight here we have 6 of us in the room, so it is really up to the board how we want to either convene in person and or we can still do it virtually. So that's really the discussion we need to potentially have for the 22nd of what that might look like.
Okay, I think it's out on the calendar from 1 to 8, so keep that in mind. If we don't need all that time, give us an update here in
Absolutely.
a week or so.
Yep.
A couple of other updates. I think just today, OSBA came out with an announcement that the summer conference is going to be done virtually. So that actually might be a good thing. I mean, I think they're putting a lot of time and energy into planning that. They've got some good speakers lined up. In some ways, it's easier to participate since you know, you can do it from home. So pay attention to that and sign up and see if you can get in there and participate. The other thing from an OSBA standpoint is I was able to join a call last Wednesday evening with our regional chairs from our region. So we had representatives from McMinnville, Newburgh, Dallas, and then ourselves. And this came about because Brandy Penner from Newburgh, who is our representative from our zone, had asked about a month ago if we needed any help with our virtual meetings, if we had any questions. I told her at the time that we were doing pretty well, but suggested that, you know, with so much going on and so much of a budget challenge, this was a month ago, we ought to think about getting together to see how each other is just beginning to respond to the budget challenges or to, you know, COVID-19 in general. So it was a good discussion. Jim Green joined. We talked for just an hour. Some of the key takeaways I had heard during that meeting, you know, Jim was able to explain some of the budget guidance, which we've heard tonight was all consistent with what we had discussed in our budget meeting earlier tonight. Dallas reported that they had approved their budget based upon kind of current course and speed, noting that, you know, we don't know until later this summer what we're actually going to do. So very similar to what we had been discussing in our budget committees. Some of the interesting things were, you know, the flexibility that we're going to need from kind of everybody as we get close to, you know, restarting in the fall. It's really only 90 days out, and we also need to give our staff a break and make sure that staff is able to recharge. And so something we just need to keep our eye on is there's a lot of planning work that's going to be going on, and we got to take care of ourselves, and we're going to have to you know, work with our union leadership and really talk about flexibility and what we can do, because you just start talking about these hybrid solutions. Well, some of that was discussed in that meeting, cohorts or, you know, rotating schedules. As we, you know, determine what we're going to do, it's a very unusual staffing situation. And, you know, every district, you know, that was represented was talking about just how challenging that's going to be. And it's very likely, I think everybody, the consensus was it's going to have to be a hybrid model, because you can't assume that every family is going to be willing to say, yeah, I feel great, let's send kids back into schools, or vice versa, whether our staff would be willing to do it. So there's going to be a lot of questions still come the fall that I think will, you know, again, this was kind of the consensus is do some phased restart, similar to what Jennifer was saying about using the summer school, and doing some type of a phasing hybrid model in the fall until we can work back towards, you know, getting back to normal. Consensus was always we need the kids back as soon as we can get them. There is, you know, no doubt that we're having impact socially, and, you know, from a learning standpoint, I think we're doing a very good job. As good a job as every other district is doing, if not better. But as you know, I think everybody understands that we need the contact with the kids, and we need the kids in contact with each other. One of the things we talked about is just whatever the hybrid, you know, nuances are within each district, how important it is to get the community conversation, community input, surveying, you know, specifically and an ongoing dialogue as we go through the summer months. And every district is going to be challenged to do that. And it's really, really important. So all the legwork we've done in the strategic plan and now the surveying is super, super important. And you know, I think we're well positioned, but we can't underestimate how important that community connection is. And then
Hey,
last,
Steve, can I add something to that? I
yeah,
think that that's a very valid point, and what I would ask our community is, you know, a lot of times, you know, summer gets over and, you know, kids need a break and different things. This has been such a unique spring that I do want to say, families, please continue to stay connected. Please continue to watch our website. Please follow us on Facebook, and because this is going to be summers where we may be sending out surveys. You may hear my voice every week still in communication as we are making decisions moving forward. So I want to articulate that as well as a superintendent, is that it's very important as a community you stay connected to us over the summer because we are going to need you as we start to make decisions and really get some quick data points of, hey, we're thinking about this. How would you feel? Here's this protocol. How would you feel? Because I think some of that is going to be very important for us to open up successfully of whatever that looks like in the fall. So thank you for that.
you're welcome. Jim, again, the president of OSBA was commenting that we're lobbying hard through OSBA, and I think COSA as well, to get the state to do centralized purchasing of PPE so that our districts are not competing against one another. So I asked him point blank, you know, how likely do you think that is that we can actually get the state to do that? And he didn't answer me directly, but it's a really good idea. I think it would be really helpful. And Don, that kind of gets to one of your questions, although that was more about, you know, being efficient in order to, you know, get the equipment and supplies that we're going to need.
And Steve, I want to say, because we know that there's some additional money that might be coming, as C shared at the bottom of that budget document, we are starting to purchase some of those. So as an example, we have bought, I think it's 40, how many thermometers?
We have
37 thermometers to check. So we're starting to know that we're going to need certain things in all of the schools, and are starting to look at that. PPE is one of those big conversations between CIS and I, and Brian, who's our head of custodial, and as well as Julie Hammond, who oversees student services. We know that that's a big part of that. So I appreciate that advocacy at a board level because we'll need to continue to have those conversations. This will be unique equipment that we have never had to purchase before. And we want to make sure that we're doing it and having it and being able to do it in the most safe way.
Yeah.
And there's a question about PPE. Of course, we're talking about personal protective equipment. We're talking about face coverings. We are talking about gloves. We actually are procuring some face shields. If you're in super close contact with students, some of whom aren't able to manage to be able to keep from tearing masks away or things like that. So we are procuring a lot of the different personal protective equipment styles.
Last couple of comments, you know, going back to the virtual conference this summer, I would imagine that there will be quite a bit of discussion at the conference this year about this situation and what different districts are doing to respond. So that's another reason, you know, if you can participate in any of those sessions, especially probably this year, you know how they always do breakout sessions. I think those are going to be really, really interesting. And in fact, I made the comment to Brandy that it was, you know, it's interesting that we were able to do this zone meeting of board chairs with Jim. He was gracious enough to give us an hour of his time, and it was great. I mean, we were able to just talk and, you know, see each other. It was in Zoom, and we'd never done that before, other than seeing each other occasionally at the conferences. It was actually a really, really good meeting to get to know each other a little bit more and just know that we're all in this together. And Jim was, you know, as he usually is, just great and just a wealth of information and insights. So we talked actually quite a bit about our respective kids that are in high school and how hard this is on our high school kids. It's hard on everybody, but the social impact on our seniors, our juniors, it's really significant. Maybe speaking a little bit personally now, but you know, we were all comparing notes because as board members, you're typically going to have older kids in high school, and that's what we were realizing, and just realizing how hard it is on our kiddos that are at that age. So it was a really, really good hour spent, and again, I think we're on the right track, but I think we've got our work cut out trying to get, to a plan for not only the summer, but for the fall. So important that we prioritize our retreat and prioritize our conference, and try to stay up with the reading and all the material that's coming our way through OSBA. And I know we're getting a flood of it, but important to try to keep up with all that. Okay, any questions for me on the board report? Okay, that brings us then to our consent agenda. We have the typical consent agenda with our meeting minutes from last month and personnel recommendations. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so move.
Thanks, Vidal. Do I have a second?
Jerry just seconded.
I'll second. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Jerry. So we have a motion to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye. I'll go through and do a roll call. Jan?
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Peggy?
Aye.
Darcy?
Aye.
Vidal?
Aye.
And I am an aye, so the consent agenda is approved. As I mentioned at the onset, we do not have any business agenda topics. We will be adjourning here in a moment, going into executive session, but before we do, we have an opportunity if anybody from the board would like to share additional comments. Now is the time.
I had a comment, but I think I'm talking with Shannon Core about involving the district with the 4th of July festivities that are being planned right now by the Independence Planning Commission or Independence States Commission, which I'm a part of as well. And what we've narrowed down are 5 separate parade routes starting at the same time, and focusing on businesses to feature or cart our seniors around. I mentioned it earlier to Jen, and she had not heard about it yet, and then I finally got a hold of somebody on the commission, and I think I'm going to table that now that I think about it until Shannon speaks with Cease. I think Cease, she might be talking to you.
And Vidal, after I had talked to you, I actually about an hour later had information that I actually have a meeting for that tomorrow. So it had not been on my calendar, and then it appeared. So we are. I don't know. We don't know the extent of everything, but we will definitely be learning more about tomorrow and what that might look like in support of our seniors, and how we might be partners as we go through this process of whatever the 4th of July is going to look like. So. Yep, okay. It is on our calendars now.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad I brought it up so I can know now.
Thanks, Vidal. Anybody else?
Just since we're doing stuff on a personal note here, I just got the key to a $2.5 million playroom for a high school and middle school students. Unfortunately, we're still working hard to try and figure out how we're going to use it. And so as we move forward, we'll be reading the same stuff that the district staff is reading to keep, develop the health and safety stuff and everything. But it will be a good place to have either a cohort of 10 or maybe a group of 25 or whatever we're able to do. And we're doing the same thing, trying to figure out where we can order thermometers and PPE from and all that sort of stuff. So, but we're going to be doing something here in the next few weeks, and hopefully maybe we can do something along with the summer school program to have some things for kids to do over the summer a little bit. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Don. And congratulations to you and the whole team that's been a part of the Gate for so many years. It is what a remarkable achievement. It's just beautiful. So proud of that facility. It's just amazing what you all have done. So really, really appreciate it.
we are making plans to let you see the inside of it before too long.
Can't wait. That reminds me, one of the other things we talked about in the call last week with the OSBA zone was how do we care for the kids? If we are in a hybrid model, we have kids that are not going to be in school every day, and we've got parents that are hopefully going back to work. So, well, I mean, it's just, I know it's on everybody's radar screen, but community partnerships are going to be so critical as we restart in the fall. And it's just one more complexity, but fortunately we have the partnership with the Gate, or we have the partnership with the Y. We have the new facility down on 6th Street. So we do have some options, probably, and more advantages in a lot of communities. So, but I think, for the board, again, we may play a more vital role in working on some of those connections come this fall or later this summer than normal. So again, we need to be helping wherever we can. So anybody else want to share a thought before we adjourn?
I have one real quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I've had some really great feedback from teachers, and then with regards to my kids in terms of the communication back and forth, and that teachers have showed a whole lot of grace with homework. Don't understand this. Can you help me figure this out? Back and forth. And then just, take 3 more days to figure it out. So you get it done completely and you're not stressed out. Just take the extra time to do it. And they've just been super flexible. And I've heard that from other high school students as well. And I think it's so amazing that that space has been a safe space to say, I totally don't understand. I need to talk to someone or what have you. And then they allow for that time and grace. It's just been awesome. And then today I got a chance to adopt 2 seniors through a national Adopt a Senior program that actually was seen by my sister in Washington. And I adopted 2 of them. And today I delivered baskets to both of them and some stuff for college. And it was amazing. They were so excited, and they brought out their caps that they had decorated, and they showed those to me, and we took pictures. It was really, really cool to be a part of that, in our community. So it was awesome.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Darcy, for sharing that. Both those. That's awesome. Anybody else? All right, given that, we are going to adjourn into executive session under the provision of ORS 192.660 open meeting law. The board of directors will enter executive session for the following purpose: to conduct deliberations with persons designated to carry on labor negotiations, which is a part of ORS 192.6602D, which happens to be one of the executive sessions where it is private, no press allowed or participate in this particular meeting. So specific information discussed in an executive session shall not be made public and shall remain undisclosed. Again, that's because we're in labor negotiations. The board may return to open meeting to take an action on executive session discussion if needed. I don't think that's expected tonight. So at this point, I will adjourn us. We are now adjourned.